Welcome to the For the Youth podcast. I'm so excited. I'm nervous about today's episode. I don't know why.
It's just different. The room is different.
See. Also, we're recording it a little bit different way. I am here with Kendall and Layne and Addy. Say hi, guys.
Hi.
Yeah, there we go. We know your mics work now. This is the For the Youth podcast. We've done 5 episodes. This is the 6th episode. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about how to share our faith, how to invite people to church. We brought in some experts, no pressure, but we're talking about a lot of fun stuff. We kind of use this podcast, Kendall, as like the filter for this podcast is these are things that we know they're important, but we haven't figured out how to address them in church yet.
Sometimes it's just like more conversational than like a sermon or something that we would, it's not that we don't want to talk about in church, but it's like, hey, we just want to sit down and have like a casual conversation about it.
And like these are things that like intersect with our faith and Christianity, but they're not like explicitly in the Bible.
Right. Yeah.
So we're like, how do we do this? We're doing it on a podcast for now anyways. But I have like a icebreaker question for us. It's super important. And like, this is really like life or death stuff. It's literally life or death stuff.
Whoa.
If all 4 of us, those watching or listening, it's me, Zack. I am Zack. Me and Zack are the same person. Kendall, Layne, and Addy. If all of us are on a deserted island, not a really good chance at being rescued anytime soon. Who are we going to eat first?
Ooh.
Oh.
Okay.
I mean, that's the ugly truth. We're going to have to eat somebody. I'm not saying I'm looking forward to it. I'm just a realist. We're going to have to eat somebody. Who's it going to be and why?
Well, both Layne and I don't eat meat.
Oh, yeah. So
I don't eat any animal product.
You're not making a strong case for yourself right now.
I know.
Then
that's what I'm
don't
saying.
have as much nutritional value.
No.
That defeats your argument right now. Your argument is like, no, meat bad, veggie good.
Well, I don't really know where I was going, but I was just saying like, no, maybe that was I think I was making a case for myself to be eaten first.
I think you just argued yourself into getting eaten.
But then Layne's saying we have like, I don't know. I think I would need to know.
If we were on an island right now,
here's what I know. You
would have to walk back years of arguments with me and Clint and the rest of our team about how like why meat is bad and you're actually more healthy. You would have to convince me on that island that you are not as nutritious.
Well, I'm not even trying to be funny about this. Like, I'm serious. You guys all eat gluten. I don't know if I could eat you.
That's a
so you guys
question.
I might have to die anyway.
Wow.
I might have to take one for the team. I don't know.
You're kind of taking all the fun out of this. Like, I wanted this to be more of an argument. Now you're being like,
and I'm like making it serious. I'm like,
yeah, I don't know. Addy, do you want to chime in on this at all?
I don't think Kendall would taste very good.
Why?
Because she doesn't eat all the stuff that I like eating.
She's not going to taste like cinnamon rolls, so I don't want to eat it.
You're like eating a spring roll. You're literally just like full of veggies.
Spring roll?
I'm like, no, I'm more of a steamed dumpling kind of guy. And yeah,
that's so funny.
I want some like gluten and meat. I don't want non-gluten and no meat.
Yeah, I'm not your girl then.
Wow. But on the other hand, she's not going to eat us because she might have an allergic reaction and die on the desert island.
I would die anyway.
And then she'd leave Layne all by herself. So, I mean, I understand. But literally, like, you probably don't prefer to eat a person in the first place.
I mean, yeah, that's a really morbid icebreaker.
We're not talking about what we would prefer to eat. We're saying we're getting kind of utilitarian here. Who would we have to eat?
Why do we have to? Why
I thought you were going to ask.
This is my hypothetical made-up question. Don't mess with it.
Okay.
We have to. We have to.
I thought you were going to ask like what our favorite ice cream flavor was.
I know. I was prepared for that.
No, that's the other
that's too
podcast.
Easy.
Oh, okay.
That's not us. We don't play like that. Okay, that's not what we're here to talk about at all. But now we know where our loyalties lie and who's I mean, like I said, Kendall just is like the nice, super kind of person. I guess you're gonna have to eat me. That's fine. So here, like I said in the intro, we are talking about how to share our faith, but we're talking a little bit more about how to invite people to church because, like, we talk about sharing our faith, how to evangelize, like that's the Christian word for it, and we talk about a lot of those things in church. But this podcast is kind of for things that we don't talk about in church, or we haven't figured out how to, because when you look at God's word, I think, does speak to everything, but it doesn't specifically list out like, hey, here's how to invite someone to your church.
Yeah.
We're a part of a youth ministry in Gainesville, Florida, at a church called Westside, and we're trying to figure out like, hey, how do we get people to come to church? So Kendall and I talk about this all the time. Like we brag about you guys both of you,
It's true, we
Layne
do.
and Addy. So I don't know, Kendall, why don't you introduce them and like explain why they're kind of the experts when it comes to this?
Oh, okay.
No
is
pressure. But yeah, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody like why they're on the podcast?
Okay. So, yeah, it's fun. Like, it's fun and funny because I feel like Zack and Clint and I like have a lot of conversations about y'all, in particular. But I feel like I'll start with Addy. Addy is now you're ninth grade, but you've been in our ministry for a long time. And like throughout your middle school, like your middle school years, you were inviting so many of your friends. And it was like we were seeing the fruits of what you were actively doing in your school. And you go to a Catholic school. And so it's like not only is she bringing people who are non-believers, but she's bringing them, and it's kind of like, oh, she's like really testing the water, and like you're like stirring things up over there, you know? So it's like
just a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. But it was really cool to see how you would bring your friends, and then they would start inviting people, and you kind of built just this culture of like people wanting to come, and they go to your grandparents' house and they like eat dinner over there, and so it's just this whole like family thing, and it's fun. And so you've brought so many people, you've brought so many guests, but then you all, like, we've seen a lot of salvations from your friends and baptisms, and that's been really cool and really special. And then Layne, I mean, it's like, it's pretty similar. Like you, I feel like when I first came on staff here, it was like you, and there was maybe you, not that you didn't have friends here, but I feel like in your like crew of people, there was like 2, 3 friends, like something like
Now
that.
there's like 40.
Now there's so
There's a
many.
lot
Like
of-
you keep bringing friends, you're inviting your other friends to come, like they're inviting friends, and it's like not just from your school, like you're bringing them from other schools, like multiple schools, and so that's something that's really cool. So like y'all have just done a great job of inviting your friends, but then also getting your friends to invite friends too.
Right. It's kind of, would you guys say, I think me and Addy, like, we have actually, like, counted up the number of people that you've brought to church and the number of people who are, like, still here. It's not that they came, like, one time. And we haven't done that with you, Layne. But, like, I think it's probably fair to say there are at least 25 people who are a part of our youth group now that would not be had you guys not invited them.
For sure.
Like, you think
Easy.
more?
I mean, yeah.
Combined?
Yeah, definitely
Oh,
combined.
Combined more.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think so.
Yeah, I'm not trying to, like, trick
'Cause
our podcast audience
whenever-
into thinking something that's not true, but yeah.
Trying to think. Okay, so I think we did that segment like January of last year, and so that's when we counted people up, and at the time it was 20. Now I'd say it's
Yeah.
probably around like 25, 30
Yeah,
plus
Yeah.
Layne.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a lot of people.
Yeah, that's tons and tons
We're
and
in
tons
the
of people.
30s.
And I would say easily 10, 15,
and we've
20.
like, and my group has acknowledged like how many people we have. We've sat down, like, we try to
It's
get
like you guys
everybody
are collecting Pokemon cards or
I
something.
know. I feel like I'm just inviting everybody, and then I don't expect as many people that respond to respond.
Yeah.
So then when all these people start coming, I'm like, I have like
What are you doing here? Oh, yeah.
I have like 3 new guests tonight. I didn't think I'd have one. That's crazy. And we've acknowledged how many people there are. Like we'll sit down and we look around. We're like, this is kind of crazy. But
And it's cool because they're like, they all want to sit together on the same rows. So it's
we
like,
like squish
they
in.
squish in and then they leak into other rows. And then sometimes they're like on the floor in front of them.
Yeah,
like
that's
they're
happened
literally,
before.
it's just like everywhere. And it's amazing.
It's like, there's seats over there. I mean, you want to hang with your crew.
Yeah, we
it's
have
cool.
the
It's cool.
seats, but it's
Don't
fine.
stop doing that. I know I've seen Sierra there before, like sitting on the ground in front of you guys and all kinds of people. I love it. It's great.
Can I
what?
just say something
Yeah,
that's
sure.
really fun too? Is like both of y'all, more so Layne's group because they're like older siblings, but now their younger siblings are coming, and
Oh,
that
yeah.
is my favorite thing.
yeah.
That we
Oh,
have
man,
like
yeah.
multiple 6th grade
Yeah.
students that are y'all siblings.
My little
Nothing makes
sister,
me happier.
She brought her friends, and before I even came to Westside, she wasn't even a Christian. So to see her now, like at Collective, and she's bringing her friends.
Yeah.
I feel like
I
such a
feel
proud
emotional, right? I
old
literally
woman.
might cry.
Yeah.
I might cry. That's so sweet. I love it.
Stop it. Yeah. I was talking to Haven about her brother Brody and how
Yeah.
he came to VBS, and I was like, who are you? He's like, oh, I'm Haven's sister. I was like, get out of here. So it's cool to see like the generations. And, hopefully our audience, trust our heart and our motive behind this. It's not all about numbers. And we're certainly not trying to like, gas you guys up too much. We don't want you to get a big head and be like, I'm going to have to take my talents to South Beach. I'm going to, have to, shop around and be like, who wants me to come to their church? Because I am, a people magnet, a guest magnet, and that's not you guys' heart at all either. But I think there are tons and tons of people who have a heart to reach their friends, who have a heart that says, I want to bring my friends to my church. I have a good time at my church. I learn things. I'm growing in my faith. I have experiences with the Lord, and I want to share those. But we don't always know how, and it's not so easy. I think if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, and it definitely comes more naturally to some people. I think God kind of gives some people like that gift, and so that's kind of what we're here to talk about. And so if you're hooked, listening or watching right now, we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of this as we go. And I had a series of questions. I was going to ask you guys, what's kind of been your experience? Like we've told your story, but like, what's like the 1 minute, maybe 90-second version from each of you guys? What has been your experience inviting people to church and sharing your faith? Layne wants
I'll
to
go ahead.
Yeah.
I think I am definitely surrounded by a lot of people who not only don't believe the same thing as me, but like are very strong in beliefs on other things. So a lot of times I get questions, and the more that I like grew into my faith, the more questions I got. So a lot of times it was more so invites came from responses to other people's questions. But before that, when I wasn't like, I don't know, I guess it wasn't something I was as known for, was just kind of like bringing random stuff about my faith in the conversation, and then slowly as I talked about it, I talked up Westside a lot, just this group in general, and then like a lot of people that are now very consistent members at Collective and Sunday mornings and stuff that I end up inviting talk about like they heard me talk so highly about Westside and about God, and also like my testimony is I use that all the time, like just what it did for me. I think leading by like almost by example. I mean, I mess up a lot, but by my story, like sharing it and being open with it is how I've found like the most response from people.
That's so cool.
Hold on. You said you messed up a lot. Are you saying you sinned?
Yes. Yes.
Kendall, we got the wrong person on the podcast. Oh my word. Cut the cameras. No, I'm joking. Thanks for sharing that, because it's really cool how you're saying like you just naturally are talking about your faith and what God's done in your life, and it just so happens that that a lot of that happened at Westside, and it's not like you're out there hawking your church and like all the other churches stinking, you got to come to mine. It's just out of a spirit that says like, hey, I've encountered Jesus, and I've encountered him a lot at this church, at this youth group, so you should talk about it. That's awesome. I want to unpack all that. Oh, Addy, why don't you share a little bit of your experience?
Okay, so I started inviting kids in 7th grade. At the time, I wasn't really thinking, like, I don't even think I knew what the definition of evangelist was, or, like, I didn't really know about spreading the gospel and that kind of stuff, but I wanted to invite 2 of my best friends. I wanted someone to come and hang out with me here. I've been going to Westside since I was little, and so I always felt really comfortable, but I wanted someone from the outside of my life to come in. At the time, we weren't really like, my Westside friends weren't really old enough to like hang out outside of church and stuff. We were still pretty young. So the fact that I had someone that I was, 2 people that I was spending 5 days a week with, plus weekends and stuff like that, that made me feel a lot more comfortable here. And I started realizing that I wanted to share the love of Jesus with them. And so I kind of started becoming more serious about being here and not just goofing off during the service and really paying attention. And I started wanting to invite more people. And then back in March of 2021, I got like 12 people here one night, and then it just started happening over and over again. My friend group was kind of longing for a new hangout spot, and so we wanted to start hanging out here, and then we did. And at first it was really easy, but then some of the parents at my school started finding out what I was doing, and they started saying some really nasty things about me. And so it was really challenging at that time. But when I look around now, from where I was in 7th grade to now, seeing so many of my friends rededicate their life to Jesus, get saved, and also make the decision to, some of them eventually go into ministry, but also get baptized as well. it's been really rewarding. So I would say very challenging, but also extremely rewarding.
That's so cool.
That's awesome. If the average 7th grader in America came to me and was like, Zach, I'm being persecuted for my faith, I'd be like, okay, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
But you were actually persecuted
Yes.
for your faith.
They
And-
didn't like me at all.
Yeah. Do you mind if I heard what someone said at one point? Is it okay for me to repeat that? I just want other people to realize how outrageous some people are.
Yeah.
A grown adult, Kendall, maybe I didn't tell you this. A grown adult said of sweet Addy here that she was doing the devil's work.
Yes.
I have heard this.
You have heard that? Okay. That's
And
the most
it's-
outrageous thing I've ever heard in my life. I got a little defensive. But that's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Addy, I think the way you love Jesus is inspiring to me. I'm like, that's not anybody doing the devil's work. That's somebody who's really, really close to Jesus.
Yeah.
So that's a lot. There's so much to unpack.
So much.
Kendall, is there anywhere that you were like, I want to start here? We do have some questions that we kind of get to, but feel free to be like, I want to dig into that.
Well, I think the first thing that, like, just listening to that, and I hope people would find encouragement from, they didn't share anything, like, crazy and outlandish of, like, oh my gosh, I decided to, like, have a pep rally with all my friends at school to, like, gather them around. It was, like, both just kind of started of, I just kind of want to have a friend at church with me. Like, it kind of started as, like, I'm just going to bring somebody with me. And so, like, I just kind of want to talk about how sometimes we can get in our head about it and overcomplicate the invite.
Right.
Because I think y'all do that really well of not overcomplicating it.
There was definitely a point in time that I did overcomplicate it. I can, like, specifically remember it was probably, like, 6 months to a year that I, like, could not get anybody to come to church. Like, I had some friends I invited before, but I just got in my head about it. And I was, I think it was during that transition when I went from, like, I definitely knew God. I had a relationship with God, but I went from that to being, like, really, like, being serious about my obedience and stuff like that. So I was getting in my head a lot about, like, I have to invite people and turning it into more of a project than, like, a relationship with these people. When in reality,
That's
now,
good.
like, when I talk to these people, it's because, like, I know what it did for me, and I desperately want, like, this person that I know so well and I care for and I love, like, I want them to feel God's love too.
Yeah.
So I think that was, like, the change. Was before it was like, no, now I'm serious about my faith. Like, this is my job as a Christian, and it is, but that isn't just the purpose behind it. Like, once I was, like, desperate for it, like, I really wanted to see that happen for them, and I did it with the right heart posture. That's when I started to see more, like, of a response, I guess.
Would you say that's like it went from a have to a want to?
Yes, absolutely.
Not
Yeah.
like this weight of like, oh, I gotta invite people to church because I feel guilty or I'm a bad Christian.
Definitely like not. I wouldn't even say guilty as much as embarrassed because I wanted to prove to myself that I was serious about my faith. So I was like, okay, if I keep inviting people, like, that's the sign of, like, a good Christian or whatever. But I was just trying to prove it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then once I was like, no, I know you. I know, like, your walk in life, and I know I know God's going to do something for you. Then it was like I wanted it more than I, like, needed it to prove something.
Yeah. I think that, like, the shift is, at first, it was for you. And it was, like, to prove that you're a Christian, to prove that you're good, to prove you're committed, serious, whatever. And then you realize, no, this is not about me at all.
Yeah.
This is about you. And, like, you care about the heart and the soul of someone. Of, like, I care about where you're going to spend the rest of your life. And it's, like, more, it's, you realize, the shift is off of you and onto them of, like, I care about these people.
That's awesome.
And the funny thing is I got way more satisfaction from when it shifted off of me to the person. I got way more satisfaction after they did come to God than I did before.
Yeah.
But,
Funny how God does that.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool. And Addy, you were talking about this is what I wanted to dig in a little bit. You were saying, like, it started off as my friends weren't like, I am dying to know Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
And dunk me in that tank and, I'm going to raise my hand and come forward and give my life to Christ. It didn't start that way. It started as they wanted a place to hang out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They, okay, I may have lied to them one
What?
time. One time.
Cut the cameras. We didn't
That's
tell her to
not
say
what
that.
she
No, I'm
said.
joking. What'd you say? Spill the beans.
To get some of them to go to youth weekend, A lot of them were single, and I go to a really, really small school.
about this.
Yeah, I know. It's so funny.
I go to a really small school, so like once you date one person, you're done. Like there's no one else for you to date because everybody's such good friends.
Yeah.
And
Right.
we've all gone to school with each other for so long that's like now you're just dating your brother. And so
It's not good. You're not supposed to do
not
that.
good at all.
Not good.
And so I may have told a couple of them that there were going to be cute boys there, knowing dang
Well-
good and well that I didn't know if there was going to be cute boys
Okay,
or not.
okay.
She was about to diss our whole
thought you were
half
about
of
to
our
throw
youth
shade
group.
at
My breath too, yeah.
All the
guys that
boys.
collected.
No, it's not. I just didn't know if there was going to be, it was mainly for youth weekend. I didn't know if there was going to be cute boys at youth weekend or not. But a couple of them were like, oh, that boy's cute. And I was like, yes. Okay.
Okay.
It worked.
Okay.
It
We're good.
worked.
Shh, okay.
He didn't lie, but it was like an empty promise.
Yes.
A hopeful promise.
Hopeful promise.
Yeah.
You're like, I mean, and cute is subjective too, right?
Totally,
You're like,
totally.
You could be like, well, I thought that guy was cute. I don't know what's wrong with you. You're just too picky. So okay, when you said lie, I was like, oh no.
Here we go.
What did you say? But that's really cool. And it started as just like, hey, I'm looking for some cute guys, or I'm looking for a place to hang out, and
Yeah.
like we've always just kind of said like, hey, you don't have to go full send and follow Jesus and like say I want the merit badge and the fish bumper sticker on my
Yeah.
car right away.
Yeah.
You know, we've said, hey, collective is for anybody. That's collective is the name of our youth group.
I think
Yeah.
that
Youth
has
group's
been
Wednesday night service.
I think that like collective is for everybody is something that I've prefaced every time I invite somebody. Like
That's awesome.
especially coming from like going from not being Christian at all. I had a lot of friends that also were not Christian at all. So then when I became a Christian, I was inviting people, you know, obviously I'm still friends with these people and now they're on like this far opposite like of the spectrum from me. So I'm like, no, like collective is for everybody. Like, are you sure? Like I'm evidently not a Christian. Like I'm going to stand out. I'm like, no, like you can come, you're welcome there. And I mean, like, that's what
I'm sorry, I had like a silly fit. Finish your thought, and then I'll tell you what I was gonna say.
No, but just telling people like, yeah, you're welcome there completely. It's for anybody, and they're like, oh, like I'm not a Christian. They're like, even if they're like, I'm probably not going to be a Christian. I'm like, just go. Like
You
don't
might find something that is of value to you.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
That's yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
I was laughing because I imagined you were like, your friend said, oh, I'm going to stand out. I was like, what if we had a rule? We're like, hey, are you a Christian? No? Oh, okay. Well, we've got this like glowing yellow lanyard that we're going to put around your neck just so we know. Because we want
We gotta know.
That one's not a Christian. And maybe some people feel like that. They're like, I'm going to stand out. I'm going to look different. And so I don't want to.
That's just called conviction.
That's conviction. Yeah, we're gonna like get to the actual questions that we planned out for this in a minute. But I just keep wanting to pull things out. So one, I think Layne, it was really sounding like in your testimony you're saying, hey, God did this in my life at my youth group at my church, and I wanted to share that with somebody else. So one, if you have a really hard time inviting people to church, just think really carefully. Like, do I love my church? Do I appreciate my church? Am I learning? Am I growing? Am I thankful for my church? You know, there might be some gratitude that's missing there. It might be like, hey, I need to recognize what God is doing. I need to recognize what some of these volunteers are doing and giving up, you know, their Wednesday night or their Sunday morning to invest in me. Like, there might be like a missing piece there. And I've told some people before, like, hey, if you don't love this youth group, if you don't love this church, I understand when you're in middle school or high school, like you're pretty tethered to your parents, and that's a good thing. But if this is not a church that you can like really celebrate, if you're not excited to bring people to your church, like one or two things have to happen. You have to work at creating a place that you want to bring friends to, like, okay, be a part of that change that you want to see at your church, or you might have to find another church. And Westside there's a lot of people who don't like Westside. A lot of people that don't like collective. We invited you guys on the show because you like it. But, you know what I mean? Like, there's all kinds of people that we could have brought on here who would have just roasted it for an hour straight. So it doesn't mean that you got to give up on Christianity. You got to find some place that you can get behind and you can champion and you are excited to bring people to.
Right.
So I think that's a part of the equation that, you know, we're almost presupposing with you guys, but we can't take that for granted either.
Yeah.
So we do have some questions. And maybe we've got some people watching or listening that are kind of like, you know, we're just talking about inviting people to church. This is just about gathering a crowd. It's not that simple. We know a lot of these people who've come to know Jesus, and that's what we're celebrating here. But But we do want to address maybe an elephant in the room. Small elephant, not a huge elephant, but my computer keeps dinging. It's so loud and interrupting. We do want to address this elephant in the room that sharing the gospel is not the same as inviting someone to church.
Correct.
Yeah.
Sharing the gospel is not the same as inviting someone to church. One is a biblical mandate. One is practical and might lead to someone hearing the gospel, but they're not the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I know from talking to you guys, you both do both. You've both talked about your faith and shared your testimony, explained the gospel to other people, and you invite people to church. Does anybody want to just talk about, like, maybe it's obvious to some, but what is different about the two? Sometimes you feel like you're doing both at the same time, but what's the difference? Where's the line?
I think that inviting somebody to church is a way of sharing the gospel. When I think about it, like, sharing the gospel is like offering somebody like an open door kind of into getting to know God.
Yeah.
And inviting them to church is like pointing out that door. You know what I mean? Like, sharing the gospel is telling them what God is about, what God has for them, that kind of thing. And inviting them to church is just another way to get that information across.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
yeah.
Okay, so it's an ends to a mean. Like, I want to get, the goal is I want them to hear the gospel, and they can hear it at the church.
Yeah.
Or I can talk to them about it at lunch. But
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I feel like the invite to the church, not to say that it's like not good, but it's kind of like the soft launch, right? Like, you know what's going to happen when they come to church. They're going to hear the gospel, but it kind of, and hopefully they are. And I think sometimes, depending on the person, it kind of takes a soft launch. Like, you guys probably can identify friends in your life right now that you're like, they are not ready to hear the gospel right now.
Yeah,
like, the gospel is going to, they're going to immediately say no. And of course, we don't want to judge their heart. We don't know. You know, God could be working on them. But it's like, maybe we need to ease them into the idea of this. And like, because the gospel is jarring, right? The gospel is like disrupts your life. Yeah. And so I think sometimes you kind of have to like soft launch them of like, oh, they'll come to church. Maybe before that, maybe they're just going to come to one of our youth events. That's like not quite like, we're getting them to like bonfire where they're going to hear the gospel, but it's like, but you're coming to a fire. You're hanging out. We're making s'mores. And then it's like, you kind of slowly get them in. And sometimes people need a little bit of that like soft launch.
Yeah, soft launch. I like that a lot. Where sometimes you're like, Holy Spirit just hit me with this. I need you to sit down because I got something to say. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and death, burial, and resurrection. Blah 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 blah. Yeah. And you got to be obedient if that's what God has put in your heart. But I don't know, Addy, you want to add anything like difference between sharing your faith and inviting somebody to church?
Well, for me personally, I have an easier time inviting people to church.
That was my next question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's good. That's totally fine.
She's ready.
You have an easier time inviting someone to church than you do sharing the gospel outright. Okay.
Because for me, even though I've grown up with the Bible stories and, knowing the ark and going through all the chapters of the Bible slowly with my grandparents and Sunday school and stuff, sometimes I just get really nervous and like my mind just blanks and I don't know what to say. Yeah. And, I love the chapter of John. I love telling the story of the resurrection and, that there's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of religion, but there's only one empty tomb. And I love that, but sometimes I get really scared and nervous and I just start stumbling on my words. So whenever I can use tools like Bonfire and Youth Weekend and stuff like that, it's much easier for me to talk to people about that because that's something that I'm comfortable with and I know exactly how it's going to go and how it's going to be like really fun and things like that.
Yeah, I'm tracking with you. Thank you for sharing that. Layne, do you feel the same? Like it's easier to invite somebody to church, less confrontational? Is one come easier than the other?
I think inviting people to church is definitely easier because, like Addy was saying, like when you're sharing the gospel, you are kind of sharing something that to some people can be completely outlandish. Like I was just talking to one of my friends who recently, I invited her to Collective and she's been coming for a while now, or for a few weeks. So I was asking her, like, what do you think is difficult about like talking to Christians? Like, what do you think makes that something that's like nerve-wracking for both people involved? And she was talking about, she's like, there's just so many preconceptions, you know what I mean? And there's so many,
a lot of baggage that comes along with
so there's just so many times that people aren't willing to hear the gospel. I mean, even in, I think it was Ephesians 6:19, I think. I hope I'm right. Paul was talking about praying for boldness.
Okay.
I hope I'm right, but I hope it's the right chapter.
I think Ephesians 6 is that armor of God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And
We're on
he's
the same
talking
track.
about praying for boldness and the words to say when talking about God's word. So I think that as Christians, it's important that we do put ourselves in the position where we do need to be bold and completely share the gospel, but it's easiest to invite people to church. I mean,
Right.
both are great and both have the same end goal.
Yeah.
But it definitely is easier to invite people to church because you need to be a little bit less bold.
Sure. I get that. And so there's like two things can be true at the same time. It may be easier, and I think I agree. I think it is easier to be like, hey, I'm doing a thing this Wednesday. Want to come? I think that there's a trap there, or there's like something to be careful of there. You do want to be careful that you don't unintentionally make people feel like tricked. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I mean, sometimes you do, and that's not the trick. Like, you do want to be like, hey, it's church. They know it's church. Hopefully you don't like tell them that you're going to Disney World and then pull up in the parking lot here
Like,
at Westside.
just kidding.
They're like, what? I thought we were going to see Mickey Mouse. Like, that's not what you're trying to do. And I know none of you guys do that. But I don't know. Like, I think there is something you can be up front with people. Like, hey, I want you to come to Youth Weekend, this event that we're doing in February. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Cards on the table. We're going to talk about Jesus. And he's a huge part of our lives. But like, even if you're not into following Jesus, there's going to be all kinds of fun games and music and things that I think you're going to enjoy.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, and we've all talked about this. Like, I know that's how you guys explain it too.
Yeah.
But
I think it's like, I'm gonna use this illustration. Illustration, is that the word? It's like inviting someone to church. You want to make sure that you're clear. It's like asking someone on a date, right? You're not just saying like, oh, we're hanging out. Some people are going to be together, and then you get there and it's just you and the person, and you're like, this feels like
This
a
is
date,
date.
right?
What?
Like, you want to
I
make
mean,
sure
if
that
you
they
say so.
know. You want to make sure that they know it's a date. But then the gospel is like a proposal. That's intense.
Sure.
That's like, no, you're getting down on one knee. Like, this is Jesus. This is the way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah.
And it's like, so that's kind of the difference of like a date. Still nervous. Still, could be nervous to ask somebody. But like asking someone to marry you, that's probably scary.
it's like asking people, I'm going to butcher your analogy, but it's fun. I want to go there. It's like asking people to come hang out at your house and then your brother proposes to them or something.
What?
Because I'm like you invite them to...
Your brother
It's like
proposed.
you're inviting them to church, but then the pastor gets up there and is
That's
like,
true.
you need to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
And
That's
it's like,
true. You're like asking
okay, I
girls
guess
to
we're getting
date.
married now.
I think
Oh, man.
I'm sorry.
This
that
is
was
so
too
fun.
much fun. Yeah.
I think that's what I was about to say is there's very few times when I'm in a situation where I think that sharing the gospel is going to be easier than inviting them to church. But the times that I do find that is when I'm talking to people who definitely don't, like, they wouldn't even consider Christianity, or I know that they have a lot of preconceptions, especially ones that when they aren't built like on any kind of foundation, they have like preconceptions just from like word of mouth, that kind of thing. Then that's when sharing the gospel, I think that's kind of like a build up to the invite to church.
Well,
You know
you're
what I
planting
mean?
that seed.
Yeah, like kind of explaining. I have a few friends, specifically one, she's super smart, and we'll always like talk about, we have very different beliefs and stuff, and we'll always talk about that. But I know that like if I hadn't been willing and prayed and like ended up asking God to make me have that gospel conversation, she wouldn't even consider Christianity as like a faith itself.
She wasn't ready for
There's
it.
no way I could have invited her to church. You know
Wow.
what I mean? If I hadn't even told her who God is. Because I think sometimes we assume that people have a background on like they know who God is, they know
that's a
who
good point.
Jesus is, and then we're like, hey, come to church, and they're like, what again?
Yeah.
Like, who are we talking about again?
Yeah.
Like, who do you worship? You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. So I think that's when gospel conversation sometimes is necessary before an invite to church.
Totally.
That's really smart.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think we ever need to be like, I'm not going to share the gospel with them. I'm going to intentionally
For sure.
wait till they get to church.
Yeah.
And I know you guys don't do that either. I'm really talking with our audience too. But we just got to realize, like, hey, none of us are promised tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we might be like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to wait till they get to church. They've said no 10 times. Well, maybe if they said no 10 times, like, maybe you're like, okay, I'm going to take matters into my own hands, the Holy Spirit's hands. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, we're going to bring the gospel to them. So you guys just heard this sermon last night. I'm not going to repreach the sermon, but one time our pastor here at Westside was using this analogy of Dunkirk. of the miracle at Dunkirk. Basically, back in 1940, the British soldiers or the Navy was trying to go and rescue a bunch of their soldiers that were stranded. There were 400,000 soldiers, blah, blah, blah. You know the whole story.
Yeah.
But the problem was they couldn't get their big ships up into the shallows. The water was too shallow. They couldn't get their big ships close enough to where they could load their men. And so what they ended up doing is that we got to send a bunch of little ships to go pick them up and then bring them either to the big ships or all the way back to England. And the analogy I was sharing with our group last night is I was like, there are some people that the big ships can't reach. Like they're not going to go to church. I mean, anybody can go to church, but some people are not going to go to church, right?
Yeah.
Collective is for everybody, but not everybody's going to go to collective. So if we trust in the big ship, we got to understand, like, we're kind of giving up on some people, and none of us want to do that. So we've got to take the gospel to them. We've got to also share the gospel. Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like whenever we talk about inviting people to church, sometimes people are like, why don't you just share the gospel? I'm like, of course, duh. But
it takes both. Like you said, like some people you have to invite them to church, and then some people you're like, I have to share the gospel with you before you're ever going to come to church. So it's both and.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean like eventually, even if somebody accepts Christ over here, you still want them to get to a church.
Yeah. Oh,
like
for sure.
I know you guys are saying this, but I'm saying this for everybody. Like, if somebody accepts Christ at the lunch table at school, you're not just like, yay,
and then move on.
Okay, see you later, right? You're like, okay, now you got to get involved in a small group. I'm kind of biased, but you could do that at my church. You know, you got to get involved in a community of believers somewhere. So whether you do one before the other or the other before one, like, you eventually got to get somebody to church. So it's something that I think it's really important to talk about.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this. You guys have kind of answered a little bit, but why do you think some people are more uncomfortable sharing the gospel, or even why are some people uncomfortable inviting people to church? Like, maybe let's focus on the second one, because you guys even already said, like, sometimes I don't know what to say, sometimes I get nervous, and it's easier to invite somebody. So let's hone in on this. Why are some people uncomfortable or nervous to make an invite?
Okay. I think sometimes it can be, I guess this might be more of sharing the gospel, but I think sometimes it can be a lack of confidence in what you're saying. Not that you don't believe in God, you know what I mean? But there's definitely a point in my faith when I knew I believed in God, I knew who God was, but I had a little bit of a lack in confidence that I could respond to what they were going to say. You know what I mean? Whether that means that I didn't know if I could, like, fully, I don't know, respond in a good way, if they responded poorly, like I didn't trust that aspect of myself, or if they had, like, a question about God himself that I wouldn't be able to answer it right. I think that's something that stopped me a little bit, was just a lack of confidence in my ability.
And your knowledge. Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes it's like, whether I bring up church or God, I'm nervous about the same thing. I'm nervous they're going to be like, well, I don't go to church because they're, you know, an evil patriarchal system, and I'm not sure how to rebut that. Or, hey, has anybody ever explained the gospel to you, that Jesus loves you? No, he doesn't love me. And this church is an evil patriarchal system. Like, the concern is kind of the same with both sometimes. Wouldn't you agree? Okay, so, like, that's one reason that somebody might be nervous. Addy or Kendall, can you think of any other reasons why somebody might be nervous to invite someone to church?
So for me, I did have a little bit of an advantage because I was in 7th grade, so I was a little bit younger and less mature. I didn't really think about something like this, but it was still kind of in the back of my mind. I was sort of nervous about my friends knowing I was a Christian and then holding me accountable.
Oh, shoot, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a huge part of it.
Well,
and me and Layne were talking about this a little bit last night. Just some stuff that's been going on in my friend group, and people being held accountable. It is almost scary because, you know, I have to handle it in the most mature way possible. And if I don't, then the card is going to be completely flipped back on me. And, you know, Addy, you talk about being a Christian. Why are you acting like this? I'm not a Christian, and I'm acting better than you are. I guess Christians just aren't better. Like, they don't act better.
Well, that part's
I shouldn't
true.
be a Christian.
Like, we're not better.
Yeah.
Our God is.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And kind of just saying, like, you know, if Addy is supposed to be held to a higher standard and she's not acting in a higher, acting as if she's a Christian, why should I be a Christian?
Right. Yeah.
So
because it's not benefiting her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
So
sure.
the concern is if I share the gospel with somebody, or if I invite someone to church, then my life's going to be under a microscope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's a big part of the reason.
Yes.
I agree. And I think some people are like, I can't invite them because I can't let them know that I'm a Christian, because then the way that I live at school and the way that I live at church are going to meet. And I can't have those two groups of people meeting each other.
Yeah.
I think you definitely have to let go of, like, we talked about this plenty of times with random things, like whether it's like cursing or like random things that you do outside of church that you wouldn't do in church, then you are accepting putting on a mask. You know what I mean? And if you're going to share the gospel and stuff, sometimes you have to be willing to let go of that mask.
Yeah.
And that definitely was like, that's a maturing point in your faith. And it's something that benefits you and all the people around you, because now you're like a walking example. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's stressful. But the lucky thing is, like, not lucky, you know, it wasn't an accident, but we do have, we have prayer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, we can pray to God, we can ask for strength and stuff. But also when you mess up, then you have an opportunity to show, like Addy was saying, handling it the best way possible.
Yeah.
You know
You're
what I
like,
mean?
you're right. I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like a two-sided coin, because on one hand, your life is never going to be perfect. Your life is never going to be good enough that you're like, okay, now I'm not worried about that at all. On the other side, like, you do have to look at your own personal testimony.
Yeah.
Like, hey, if I'm literally like, I almost used an example that I shouldn't have used. Thank you, Holy Spirit, for intercepting that. But like, if you're living a really sinful lifestyle at school and everybody around you knows it, like, yeah, there's going to be some contradiction and some hypocrisy once you invite them to church. But I think there's also an opportunity there for you to say, like, hey, I'm going to be honest with you. I've not been living the way that I need to.
Yeah.
And you might see a problem with it, but I'm convicted about that. I say that I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm going to try to do better. And I'm going to go to my church this Wednesday. Do you want to come?
Yeah.
Right? Like, so long as you're open, like, hey, I got my own issues and I've not been living up to my own standard. You want to come watch me try to do better? You know what I mean? I think it's all about, like, the humility that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
there.
Well, I think it kind of comes back to, again, of like taking the focus off yourself.
Yeah.
You know, like, we get nervous because, you know, nobody wants to be rejected. No one wants to be told no, even if you're just like asking your friend to hang out with you for an hour, 2 hours. Like, you don't want them to say no. You know, it hurts sometimes. And so, you know, inviting someone to church, you don't want to feel that rejection. But then when you put it into perspective of, this is not about me, they're not rejecting me personally, like, this is bigger than that of, you know, like you said, it's a maturing in your faith where you're like, you know, I'm taking some accountability for my actions. You know, I need to change the way I've been living. Also, this is, you know, not about me. Like, I want you to come along and you to be able to experience the Lord as well. So it's, you know, there's like multiple different like caveats of why you might be nervous. But yeah.
Yeah,
Good question.
yeah.
Good thing to think
I like
through.
stress my foot. I'm not like raising my hand like, I have a question. Did I interrupt you?
No.
Okay, good. I'm sorry. Okay, so we're creeping up on an hour, if you can believe it.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. We're not there yet, but we want to start landing the plane a little bit. And there's some things that are like, I've had on the back burner. I'm like, we got to talk about this before the episode's over.
Yeah.
How many times have you guys been told no?
A lot.
Like a lot, like by people that you invite to church, people you share the gospel with.
I mean, I've been told no by some of the people that I've watched get baptized in the past month.
Yes.
Like, no
Ooh.
for like a year. I mean, even one of my best friends, it was in her testimony. She's like, Layne kept inviting me and I kept making up excuses, and then I went and now I got to watch her get baptized.
Yeah.
But then there's
So awesome.
That is amazing. But there's also people that have told me no, and for the past like 2 years, and I still haven't gotten them to church. But I mean, I pray about them. Like, as soon as that seed is planted, like, their name's in my prayer journal. Like, they're like, whether they know it or not, they're on my mind. And I like to believe that they can feel that somebody's praying for them. And especially, you know, like, we're called to plant the seed and we're not called to see it come to action all the time. You know what I mean? Like, it might be that they get into their, like, into college and stuff, and then they meet another person who's a Christian, and they think back and they remember one friend in high school that, like, was like, hey, please come to my church.
Yeah.
And they're like, they said no, and now they're thinking about that, and they're like, okay, I'm going to do it this time. So I've been told no, it's turned out great, and I've been told no, and it hasn't really come to be anything yet. So
Yeah, it stings. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Addy, what about you?
So I've been told no. So so many times.
Yeah. Would you say more no's than yes, or more yeses? Maybe some of both?
For sure. More no's than yes.
Awesome. I mean, not awesome, but like I think that's encouraging for a lot of our friends watching and listening to hear.
Yeah.
And at first, it stung a little bit, but I've kind of gotten like, okay, whatever, like I'll try you next week. I don't back down. I've always had a very type A, persistent attitude. From the time I was way, way little. And so I ask them about every week, and usually they finally just get annoyed and come with me because they don't want to hear about it anymore. But something I've been dealing with now, like recently, is people that have come for a long time. I've seen them flourish here. I've seen them, some of them get saved here, rededicate, and now they're starting to say no. And that stings
like
even more.
Cycle.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mourn that with you. I think anybody here who's experienced something like that, seeing somebody who professed to know Christ, who showed some fruit even of knowing God, when they start to walk away, you're like, no. What's happening?
Yes.
You were doing so good. There's this Hillsong Young and Free song. I cannot remember the name of it. I think it's called First Love. And it's a really unique song. I've not heard a lot of songs with this message, but it's literally like a prayer to God, saying like, God, like, help my friends come back to Jesus.
Yes.
Like God, please keep chasing after them, because like I saw them and I want to see them come back to their first love, come back to you, God. And I like that song a lot because it's a unique message. It's something that all of us relate to. It's not sponsored by Hillsong Young and Free or anything along those lines, but I think that's something that that's been heavy on my heart too.
Yes.
So, but what I'm pulling out of that from both of you guys is that people tell us no all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of time when I'm inviting someone to church or I'm preaching at church, and we give the gospel invitation. I know for a fact there's tons of people that God is like pulling at their heart and they just refuse. And sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's pride, sometimes it's it's one thing or another. But what I think all of us can see from you guys' stories and from our experiences too is we're not responsible for the end result.
Yeah.
We're responsible to be obedient. And
Plant the seed.
to plant that seed. Jesus uses the parable of the seeds and the sower. In Matthew 28, he says, "Go therefore into all nations, teaching them to observe all I've commanded you, and baptizing them in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit." Like, that's a command. We got to do that. And so ultimately, we're not responsible for the end result. We're responsible to be obedient, and we leave the result to God. And we want to do that in as tactful and as accurate a way as we can. But we just got to be faithful and obedient. So I think, you guys are basically Michael Jordan. I don't know if you've ever heard this analogy. Like, Michael Jordan tells a story all the time. He's like, I missed millions and millions of shots. I think he actually totaled it up. He probably paid somebody to total it up. In his NBA career, he's like, I missed this many tens of thousands of shots, and I had this many turnovers, and I had this and that, and I lost this many games. But he's like, I don't let that hold me back.
Yeah.
And I don't let that, keep me from continuing to invite people, continuing to share the gospel. And you guys haven't done that either. So I love it. And you guys are an inspiration to me, and I'm really thankful that you're a part of our group here. But any other closing thoughts, Kendall, Layne, Addy, anything else that you're like, oh, wait, I do want to ask that, or this question, wrap it up or whatever?
I would just say, like, for y'all to maybe share like one tip of like inviting your friend, like if you have one tip, just a pro tip of like whatever, if you have like, I always use this phrase, or I always try to get it in conversation, like however, whatever your tip is, I feel like that you should end with that.
I think this is something that came to my mind just today. I was talking to a friend of mine who I think I'd mentioned her before. She recently started coming to Collective a few weeks ago, after a bunch of invites and stuff like that. And I asked her today, I was kind of preparing for this podcast, I was like, what is something that you think stopped you from coming to church for a while? Like, what was something that held you back? And she was like, she told me, she's like, I was nervous. Like, she's like, even when I first got here, it was overwhelming. But she was like, really, it's just like not knowing if I'll have a group there or not, and not knowing if I'll have people there. So one thing I'd suggest is make sure that, like you were saying, like make sure you love your church, make sure that you you love your people there. You know what I mean? Like it's gotten so much easier to invite people because I have so many people, like friends here, and like we were talking about that big friend group, like that I know love God. And I know that when I bring a person in that doesn't know God, they're going to accept them like open armed. And I'm not, you know, I don't have to worry about like hiding certain aspects of my church.
That's
you know
huge.
Because I have complete faith in like the way that God's moving here. So that's one thing I'd say is just like remember that people are stepping into a place that they're completely unfamiliar and they've heard all these stories, good and bad. So, you know, like have a little bit of a plan. Like have a plan, but also have faith that God is in your church.
That's good.
I love that. That's so good.
And
What
that's,
say, Addy?
well, I'll kind of play off Layne and then I'll say my little thing. And that's something that I have to brag on, not only the welcome team, but like just everybody, because whenever I have a new face, I usually immediately take them to the welcome desk to get them signed up and stuff. But it's definitely not just the welcome team that does it, but everybody greets them with a smile and how are you doing? And it's like they've known them for years, not just it's their first time meeting them. For me, my favorite, I guess, phrase or word of wisdom, I learned it 2 years ago at a church camp in Oklahoma when I got called into ministry. The pastor, there was a lot of kids that were, I think, feeling that call, but they weren't wanting to accept that call, or they didn't like that God was convicting their heart for not inviting people to church. And he told us that he could feel that there were people being convicted, and that God does not call the prepared. He prepares the called.
That's good. Yeah. You don't have to have it all figured out before you get it. You just have to say yes and trust that he's gonna help you figure that out. Like God said to Moses, Moses was like, I'm not good at speaking. He's like, shut up. I'm going to put the words in your mouth. Just be obedient. I don't think God said shut up. That's kind of mean.
Probably not.
It's probably a bad word.
Well, that's definitely, whenever we were doing our Everyone's Offended series, I don't know why I remember this, but it always sticks out in my head is you would pray before you actually did it because it was offensive topics. And you would say, like, God, please give me the words to say tonight. If you don't want me to say them, if they're going to be too offensive or, you know, disrupt something, shut me up. And that's what I pray before I invite any friends to church. During worship sets on Wednesday nights, I get on my knees right before you or a speaker goes up, and I pray that because I just want to see the gospel move, and I want my friends to accept it as best as they can, even if it is calling them out sometimes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I'm really, really glad that we did this.
Me
Layne,
too.
I got to say this one more thing before we're done. You were talking about, you asked your friend, you know, what was it that was keeping you from coming to church or saying yes? And I had a professor, like a personal evangelism professor, who used this like example of this pro tip, and he said it this way. He was like, what you ask people is you say, hey, is there anything that would stop you from accepting Christ today? He didn't say like, hey, do you want to accept Christ? It's like, is there anything stopping you from accepting Christ today? Because that makes you think like, no, there's not. Actually, I can't think of something. But if you put out like an open invitation, it's like, maybe I do, maybe I don't. I'm going to keep thinking about it. But like, no, what is stopping? And if there is something, I was nervous, then you're like, oh, well, we can address that. I don't want you to be nervous because I'm going to sit there with you. And let me tell you, my friends are really welcoming and friendly. You know, you can address that. But, you know, like, hey, what is it going to take for me to get you to come to my church this Wednesday? Is there anything stopping you from coming to my church this Wednesday? But you guys are pros. You guys are amazing. And not to gas you up, not to give you a big head. You've been obedient, and God's used you. God's given you the words, and we're really glad that you're a part of our group. So thank you guys for being a part of this. Thank you for watching, listening to this podcast. Make sure that you hit subscribe, follow, like it, whatever you got to do to make sure that you see the next episodes when they come out. And if you want to get more connected to a church like ours, this church, or we can help you find a church wherever you're at, hit the link in the description, and we'd be happy to talk with you. Talk to y'all soon.